Hello. Today we're going to be talking about the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. I first was exposed to these when I was a freshman in college. I was taking an Introduction to World Religions class, and in our Buddhism section, we learned about the Four Noble Truths. And ever since that time, I've thought about these ideas, these observations, and have let them influence the way that I look at the world. And I think they've been really helpful as I've gone through my life, and my understanding of them has deepened. And I think they're really worthwhile, whether one's a Buddhist or a Christian or an atheist or a Muslim or whatever religion, the insights in these I think are very valuable. And so we're going to be talking about the Four Noble Truths in this lecture. So as you may recall, in the life of the Buddha, he sat under the Bodhi tree, he reached enlightenment, and after a total of 7 weeks, he then proceeded to get up and travel down to Sarnath. And Sarnath is what you see behind me here. And it's at Sarnath that he comes across the ascetics that he had been with. You may remember that he had spent a considerable amount of time living the life of an ascetic with these 5 guys, and he eventually left them, but when he comes back and finds them again, they recognize that he has attained this ultimate goal. He has attained enlightenment, and so they sit at his feet and they listen to his wisdom. And the story goes that he teaches them the first sermon, the sermon on the Four Noble Truths. And these Four Noble Truths, they get expressed in different ways at different times. They're referred to differently in English and in translations, and sometimes in longer explanations, and sometimes in very short summaries. In Japanese, they are referred to sometimes simply as Kushu Metsudo. That's the Four Noble Truths. But we're going to be looking at a little fuller explication of what these are. So what we're going to do is look at one of these at a time and see if we can understand what it was that the Buddha wanted to communicate to his disciples and why this is such an important aspect of Buddhist teaching. So here we go. I'm going to write these down here. So we're going to be talking about the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. So the first one is to live is to suffer. That's the first noble truth. To live is to suffer. And the word that's being used for suffer here in Pali is the word dukkha. And so when we talk about this, what is it that the Buddha is saying? He is not saying that the world is full of suffering. That may be true, and that's something that all sorts of people will have observed, but he's saying something a little bit differently than that. He's not saying the world is full of suffering or there's a lot of suffering in the world. He is saying to live is to suffer. That is to say that living and suffering go hand in hand. You cannot separate them. If you say that the world is full of suffering or there's a lot of suffering in the world, then there's the possibility that maybe I could avoid it. Maybe there's a lot of it, but maybe I could, steer clear of it. Maybe I could avoid it, and that would be great. But his first noble truth is no, to live is to suffer. To be alive is to suffer. We're born in suffering, we die in suffering, and throughout our lives, suffering is the norm. And it's important to understand that when he uses this word dukkha, it's not only physical suffering. Physical suffering is part of this, but psychological suffering is no less a part of this. And the idea behind the word dukkha is a wheel that has its hub out of center, or a joint that is dislocated joint, like your shoulder's dislocated. And so it's this dissatisfactoriness, right? Things are out of kilter. Things are not the way that we wish they were, that we imagine they were, that we crave for them to be, but rather to be alive is to exist in suffering. And so the answer, as you're going to see, is not to avoid suffering. When I teach this to students, right, when I'm teaching a class of college students, I I always stop and think that the people I'm teaching have it as good as a person could have it in the history of the world. These are the human beings who have it as good as it can be got, right? These are people living here in the early 21st century at a time that is the most advanced technologically in terms of wealth and prosperity. They're living at the most advanced time in human history. They're also living and residing in the most advanced economic society in the world, right? They're living in the wealthiest society in the history of the world here in the United States. And these are students who are intelligent, right? They're in college, they're college students of a good college, and so they have intelligence. They also are wealthy, right? They may not always think that they're wealthy, but in terms of international standards, yeah, we're all pretty wealthy. And especially if you look at the history of humanity, we are immeasurably wealthy in terms of what we have in this day and age. And also the students in my classes are not only wealthy and privileged, but they're also young, right? They're young and healthy. They're all about 20 years old or so. And so they're at their physical peak. Sorry, it only goes downhill from here, right? You're at your physical peak. You're healthy, you're strong, you're attractive. Everything is about as good as it can be for a room full of human beings. And yet my students know that despite the fact that they've got it about as good as it can be got, life is still characterized by this suffering, by this dissatisfactoriness, right? My students still have to deal with the problems that happen in life, with the loss of loved ones, with depression, with chemical imbalances, with injuries, right? They have problems with their families, they have problems with their neighbors, they're striving after things in life that they don't feel like they're obtaining, and life is dissatisfactory. So even for the people who have as much as a person can have, they know that things aren't quite what we wish they were, right? To live is to suffer. And so you can't really avoid that. So with that in place, we're going to move to the second noble truth. So to live is to suffer. How do I get back here? Hit this button. I'm sorry about this. This is not going as well as I wanted it to. All right, well, we'll try it here. Not lined up that great, but that's fine. Life is suffering. So the second noble truth is cause of suffering is desire. And the Sanskrit word is tanha. The cause of suffering is desire. Desire is the word that's usually used here. I don't think it's the best one, but it's the one that's the most common. So we'll start off with that. The word tanha actually comes from the word thirst, but the translation that I think is better in English is craving. The cause of suffering is craving. So we know that there is suffering. Why is there suffering? Well, because there's craving, there's desire. So if you think about this, lots of people have this realization, but it's an important one to reflect on from time to time. We crave after things and we make ourselves miserable, right? It's no coincidence that you find in the Four Noble Truths this emphasis on the problem of craving. You also find this in other religious traditions. In the Ten Commandments, the last one or two, depending on how you number them, is a warning about coveting, right? Don't covet. And coveting is this sort of craving. It's not that coveting is just bad because it's a sin. Coveting is bad because it hurts us. And in the New Testament, right, where Jesus says, if you lust after a woman in your heart, you've committed adultery, right? It's not just the acts, it's lusting. And it's the same word in Greek from the Septuagint in a translation of the Ten Commandments to what Jesus is saying. Lusting, coveting, craving, this is all harmful to human beings. So we know that we make ourselves unhappy when we do this, right? And so you can be going through life and things are going fine, you're having a good day, and then you see something that you really wish that you had, right? Maybe it's someone else's car, maybe it's someone else's clothes, and maybe it's someone else's purse, right? You've got a Louis Vuitton, but they've got a Hermès, and so you just wish that you had that, and so that's what would make your life really good, and so you crave after that. You might have been having a perfectly good day, but when you see something that you wish you had and you crave after that, you just magnify the dissatisfactoriness that's within our lives, and you don't feel good about it, right? And so there are lots of things that we find ourselves craving after. We look through a magazine and we're like, oh, I wish I had that. And this is what people in marketing do, right? They make us crave after things. They make us feel unhappy and dissatisfied until we buy what they're selling. And so craving after things is certainly a way that we pretty quickly realize we can make ourselves unhappy. And so we not only make ourselves unhappy by wanting that, but a lot of times by virtue of trying to get that stuff, we make ourselves and other people unhappy or miserable, or we create suffering, right? If you think about all the suffering that happens in the world when people kill each other, when people assault each other, when people do horrible things to each other, a lot of times it's because they really want something that that other person has. And so we're willing to do terrible things to each other in order to get that. So that's, that's pretty straightforward, and we understand that. Then some people, go about as far as that, no further, but there's more insight to be had here. So some of you may be familiar with the Sheryl Crow song about how she wants to soak up the sun and tell everyone to lighten up, or whatever the name is of that song. And in that song, she says something rather interesting. She says, it's not getting what you want, it's wanting what you've got. And people listen to that song and they're like, yeah, Sheryl, you're so right. That's it. It's not getting what you want, it's wanting what you've got. But the Buddha would say, nice try, Sheryl, but not quite, right? Because when you want the things that you've got, right? When you're like, oh, I'm just happy and satisfied with what I already have. Well, guess what? The things that you have are going to be taken away from you, right? Nothing is permanent. Nothing is forever. Your new car is going to get old. Your new clothes are going to get old, right? All these things that we have in life can be taken away at a moment's notice. Wealth can be taken away. Possessions can rust and can get taken away. And so when you want what you've got, well, when you crave after the things that you already have, when you hold on to them tightly, when they get taken away from us, it causes pain. It causes pain to us, and we often cause more pain to others when this happens to us. So it's not just, craving after things you don't have. Even when you crave after the things that you do have, you create suffering. And it's not just things. We've just been talking about things. But what are your plans, right? What are the things that you are going to do with your life? Right now we're in the middle of the coronavirus, and we're all quarantined. And so we can't be doing the things that we wanted to do. And we had plans. My son's a high school senior. And I have students who are college seniors, and they had plans for their graduation. They had plans for the prom. And so these things get taken away. And when your plans get taken away, that can make us miserable too. Even when nothing is actually taken away, nothing is actually harming us. The psychological effect of people taking away things that we were going to have can make us miserable. I had a student once, a student I really liked. She was a great student, and she was a great athlete. She was a basketball player. And she had a fantastic junior year on the basketball team. And her senior year was going to be great, right? She was going to be a captain. She was going to have be leading a really strong team. And I know she was looking forward to her senior year playing basketball. And one day near the beginning of the season, it was during preseason, I think, she came into my class and she was limping a little bit. And I said, oh no, you're limping. And so I started teasing her about this, about how, looks like your senior year's, in trouble. And I figured that she had just, had some minor little problem, that she just twisted her ankle a little. But it turned out that she actually had a more significant injury, and this was going to totally screw up her senior year playing basketball. And she started to get a little emotional, understandably, and started crying. And I felt really bad because this was a student I actually liked. And so it was one of those things where it wasn't that the pain in her ankle was causing her so much misery or suffering. It's what was being taken away from her. She had plans. There were things that she was going to do. And when that got taken away, then that caused suffering. So even when we crave after things that we hope to have in the future, that can cause suffering. And again, it's not just things and plans and activities that we're going to do. It's our health, right? our health can get taken away from us at any point in time. We can't hold on to our health. And so if you crave after maintaining your current level of health, now college students, they don't even think about it, but you get to be a little older and your hairline starts receding and you start getting wrinkles and your joints hurt. And if you crave after keeping a young, healthy body, you're going to be miserable when it starts going to pot. You know, can you come to terms with the fact that, you know, your body is going to start to deteriorate, and it will continue to deteriorate until you die? And this is the other thing that we got to think about when it comes to craving. We crave after life, right? We don't want other people to die. When you know, for my college students, they're at an age where grandparents die. For me, I'm at an age where parents pass away. And so the idea that we can keep hold of them forever is obviously wrong. But when they get taken away from us, it causes great suffering, right? We want to keep them forever and we want to hold on to them, but we can't. And even our own life, right? Do you crave after your own life, or do you recognize that your life will eventually be gone, right? Your life will eventually end, and that will be the end of you. That will be your death. And so do you also crave after that? So there are all these things that we crave after. And the craving and the holding on and the desire and the thirst to have these things in our lives makes us miserable, creates suffering. Okay, so we need to move on to the third noble truth, and we'll do this a little faster this time. Oops. All right, very unprofessional here, but you can still read this. Okay, so the third noble truth is to overcome suffering, eliminate desire. That's it. To overcome suffering, eliminate desire. So we know that life is suffering. We know that the cause of suffering is desire. So in order to overcome suffering, we need to eliminate desire. Now, it's important to understand that what we're saying here is when we talk about desire and craving, it's not just the normal wanting and desiring of things that we're talking about, right? So for all of us, there are things that we just naturally want, right? When it gets to be lunchtime and your stomach starts rumbling and you're like, I want to eat a muffin, well, okay, that's not what we're talking about here. That's not desire and craving, because you can't eliminate that, right? So we're not talking about eliminating wanting things, right? So when you want a muffin because you're hungry, that's fine. When you want a new car because you need a new car to get to work, okay, that's fine. And when you want your loved ones to be healthy and to stick around for a long time, that's all normal and natural. And we're not saying that you can't want things or that you can't have relationships. Craving, right? Craving and desire and coveting, right? This is what we're trying to overcome. But while it's normal to have wants and it's the craving that we're trying to eliminate, this is obviously easier said than done, right? It's not like you can listen to this and go, oh, okay, I get it. I see where I'm creating problems for myself. I'll just stop craving. Boom, there, everything's fine, right? We can't do that any more than, you look at Judaism and Christianity and Islam and they say, don't sin. And you're like, okay, right? I'll just stop sinning now and love my enemies, right? So you know what you're supposed to do, and you might agree that it's good, but you can't do it, right? So we recognize that it's easier said than done, but you can make progress, right? We can all make progress. You can start to recognize when you're craving more quickly and put a stop to it. You can stop doing things that make it easier to crave after things. So you can make movements in this direction. You can improve in this direction by overcoming craving. I like to think about it, this way. If you were to take hold of the blade of a knife, right? If you had a sharp knife and you were to hold on to the blade of that, you were holding the knife by the blade. If someone comes and snatches that blade, that knife out of your hand, it may cut you, but the tighter you're holding on to it, the more it's going to cut, right? So you can't hold on to anything forever. So if you've got this knife in your hand, sooner or later, it's going to be taken from you. But the tighter that you hold on to it, the more you grip it, it's more it's going to cut, the more pain and suffering is going to come when it gets taken and when it gets pulled out of your hand. And so we have to learn how to hold on to the things that we have in life lightly, right? We have to learn how to enjoy the things that we have. That we are going to possess things, we're going to want things, but we don't want to hold on to them too tightly. One story that I find rather interesting that I think illustrates this pretty well. There's a guy named D.T. Suzuki, very famous teacher of Zen Buddhism. And he had a wonderful relationship with his wife. They had a very good marriage. They lived as a happy couple for a very long time together. And eventually she passed away. And he was distraught, right? And there were people who came and asked him, they said, look, you spent your life studying Buddhism and meditating and practicing, but it didn't seem to work. You didn't overcome craving, right? You're still suffering, you're still sad. And he said, look, when my wife died, I was distraught, right? I cried bitterly, but my tears didn't have roots. And that statement stuck with me. The idea of his tears didn't have roots. Of course it hurts when someone who is a loved one gets taken away from you. Right? Of course he had tears. Of course he was sad. That's normal. That's human. We're not trying to make ourselves into some sort of passionless zombies, right? But do the tears have roots, right? Did we recognize that there was a time when we would lose the things that we have? And can we come to grips with this is the reality that we live in? Or do we hold on to the idea that, no, this is wrong and this shouldn't have happened and I'm going to, fight against what happened for the rest of my life? And so here was a person who, of course, was sad when his wife died, but he knew life is passing, right? We all end up losing the people around us, the things in our lives, but can we hold on to that knife a little more loosely? Can we hold on to the things that we enjoy, that we love, with the knowledge that, yeah, these are not forever. And if we can, then at least when they are ripped from us, at least the tears will have no roots. So that brings us to the end of our third noble truth. And now we need to move to, we'll do it this way first, just so we can keep this all on one little beautiful document. The fourth noble truth, which is the Eightfold Path. That's it, the Eightfold Path. So the Four Noble Truths here, right? To live is to suffer, the cause of suffering is desire, and to overcome suffering, you need to eliminate desire. And then the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path. And I'm going to share an image with you. This is an illustration of the Eightfold Path. And each of the 8 parts of it all begin with the word right. So there is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, and right mindfulness. Sometimes these get translated differently, but you find the basic idea here. And what the Eightfold Path is basically a program, right? It's a path, it's a program, it's a way that you can make progress in understanding the suffering of the world and how craving contributes to that and how you can overcome that craving. And so this can be explicated at great length, but we're not going to do that. I'm just going to make a couple quick observations. So right view, right? First of all, you have to understand this, right? You need to understand how this all works and how craving leads to desire. So there needs to be that right view. We're just going to jump around to a couple of these. Right mindfulness, right? We'll go backwards. Right mindfulness or right meditation, right? There are times that you need to develop, there are always the reality that we need to develop the mental strength, the mental fortitude, the mental insight to stop ourselves from craving, to recognize where we are, to exist currently in our world, stop getting caught by the past, stop getting caught by the future. And meditation is a way that you can help cultivate that ability to control your mind, to recognize when your mind is going astray, to stop thinking harmful thoughts. Right effort is another one, right? This is one that I think is interesting because Buddhism, like some of these other Eastern religions, like Hinduism and others, there's this idea that, look, you've got to work. If you want to make spiritual progress, if you want to achieve maturity and excellence, you need to work. No musician ever becomes great by practicing once in a while when they feel like it, right? If you want to be a great musician, you have to put in hours and hours and hours, right? And so it takes, you know, you got to play until your fingers bleed, right? Well, depending on what instrument you're playing. You have to just work, 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 work if you're going to make progress. If you want to be a great athlete, you have to put in an immense amount of time and energy and sweat and blood, right? So we know that excellence in anything requires great effort. Why is it different in the realm of the spirit? Right? Why is it that we think that when it comes to religion, well, yeah, you can show up on Sunday mornings and sing along with the songs that are printed there in the bulletin, and then afterwards you go to the potluck and have some Jello salad, right? And I'm sorry to pick on the Lutherans, right? But you just sort of do this and enjoy it and get through the sermon and sing the songs, and that's it, right? That's religion, right? And so here, if you want to be great, you have to work. Just like in music, just like in athletics, just like in anything. If you want to achieve excellence, you have to put in the effort. And so with the different aspects of the Eightfold Path, and we could talk about all of them, but we're going to not let this go too long. These are a way that you can develop yourself in this direction. And so I mentioned earlier that in Japanese, the Four Noble Truths are sometimes talked about as Kushu Metsu Do. And Do, right, for the Eightfold Path, Do is path or way. So if you're familiar with Budo or Shodo, which is the way of calligraphy, or Chado, and if you're familiar with Taekwondo or Judo or Karate Do, it's all the same word Do, right? It's a path. It's a discipline where you through disciplining your mind and your body, you try to attain to excellence. And so it's the same here. There's a way, there's a path, there's a discipline that you should work at if you're going to achieve excellence in all of that. So this is our introduction to the Four Noble Truths. And while this aspect of Buddhism is very popular in the West, it is an essential aspect of Buddhism. It is particularly notable among people in the West. And I think a lot of that is because, as you can see, there's a lot here that is consistent with any worldview, whether you are a Muslim or an atheist or whatever, right? There's nothing here inconsistent with any worldview. And I think that's one reason that people are very fond of this. But there's a lot more going on in these ideas than simply, you know, yeah, when I wish I had stuff that I don't have, I become unhappy. That's not a bad insight, but it goes a lot deeper into this. And so if you go through life recognizing where we're craving after things and how we create more suffering for ourselves and for the people around us because of this, and how you can overcome this tendency, and how you can spot it when you're engaged in it and stop it more quickly, you're going to make some progress. You're going to make yourself happier. You're going to make other people happier. And if you're living a more fulfilled life, you're in a position to help others live a more fulfilled life. And that's a great thing. So I look forward to any comments that you may decide to leave below, and I hope you all stay safe and have a great day.